Reality is complicated. For hundreds of thousands of years this planet has been around, we still don't quite have a solid definition of reality. Each person tends to land on different conclusions as to what real is, but seemingly all of them concur that we, as the subjects of our lives, are real. Other people might not, but I think, therefore I am. A broader approach to this thought might be that only the things I see are real. My reality only extends as far as my perception can reach. Those outside of it are not real, nor do they exist. But that thought process only works in the real world. You can reach out and touch the screen that you are watching this in, you feel the chair or bed beneath you. But then what about this video? The video itself? Yes, I have made this video, I have posted it, it is taking up space on the internet. For all intents and purposes, this video is real. Even if you can't reach out and touch it, this video is still real. But what of the contents in it? This chair, this mic, the funny graphics I can throw up, the sound effects I play, the facts I show, my personality, my voice, me. Am I real to you, dear viewer? Ultimately, that choice is up to you. Reality is not only something that exists that we can feel, but reality is also a belief that we fall into. We believe in ghosts, and ghosts become real. Their existence, their state of reality is ultimately dependent on if we believe in them. We may believe that this video and its contents are real because that makes for a better viewing experience. We might believe that I am real because you can connect me better. I am a human with human thoughts and emotions that can respond to yours. But believing is ultimately a choice one makes. Accepting reality is a choice we must make. Which begs the question, do you believe in anime? Hi, I'm a human. And unless you're seeing this after the aliens come, then you are probably also human. As humans, we have been given tools to help us live in this world, like being able to see with our eyes, hear with our ears, and think with our brain. All of those complex processes come together to give us the ability to watch anime, the greatest gift of all time. Being a human is great, until it's not. We only live for roughly 80 years, we have independent minds which require independent thought, and we live in a late-stage capitalistic nightmare that is totally natural and not manufactured at all. Though to each individual person, life means a different and unique thing. Because we have eyes to see and a brain to think, each thing that we experience will be processed differently. And the thing that comes from that is what we call perspective. A person who grew up without wealth is going to see that late-stage capitalism nightmare much differently than someone who has benefited from that system. A gay person who has fought for gay right to marriage is going to have a much different perspective on marriage and everything that it entails than someone like, say, a religious figure. That is within the confines of this world, though. Even people within the same world, living in the same society, are going to have different perspectives on it. But what about people and worlds much different from our own? If you stretch that thought to a different world, say Middle Earth, the people who live in that world are going to have a much different perspective on life than you and I. Fucking dragons exist there, you know? I have never had to deal with something like that in my regular life. It is not real to me, so my perspective on dragons doesn't exist because I have never seen one. Trying to understand a fictional story through the perspective of a human who lives on Earth will always be a bit awkward because, well, we are earthly beings with an earthly perspective on all situations. Being violently confused every time something fictional walks on screen doesn't make for a good viewing experience. So, in order to enjoy the fictional stories that God has given us, we must make sure that our perspective and the life that we live does not interfere with the story that we are seeing play out, which is something called the suspension of disbelief. To abandon your pre-existing perception of reality and just accept, mostly at face value, everything you are being told while consuming fictional media. Even if dragons are a foreign concept to us, if you suspend disbelief, then dragons are just the status quo. If dragons are really scary, and the perspective of every character in that world is that dragons are scary, then you should think that dragons are scary. You are but a bystander in this world. With no agency over the plot, you must accept. You are but a bystander in this world. With no agency over the plot, you must simply accept what you see in front of you as the god of this world. The writer shows its main character, and by proxy you, new things. immersion. It is a pretty interesting topic that is heavily sought after by writers, and yet it is rarely talked about in consumer spaces. And that's because when a story has good immersion, you don't notice it. That is literally the whole point of immersion, to separate yourself from the world around you so that your only focus is on the thing in front of you. But that also means you only notice when you are immersed in something when your immersion breaks and you are brought back into the world around you. So how do you make this magical feeling of the world disappearing around you? Well, I don't really know, is what I would say if I haven't spent the last month of my life researching this topic for this video. Writing a story is a complex process. Before the intricacies that make a story or world good, a writer has to make sure that the foundation they are building their story on is clear and understandable before they build on top of it. When creating a character, for example, you have to give them a personality. And while this can be a process of word association, any good story gives a good reason as to why the character's personality is the way that it is. If you give reason to their personality, then you are creating a story that ultimately feels like it could exist, because you've shown how this fictional character became the way they are. And after you have given an adequate reason as to why a character acts the way that they do, you can put that character into different situations and have them respond in a way that suits their personality, which can lead to story development. This is an example of cohesive and naturalistic storytelling, where the story and each action that takes place within it has been justified or will be justified. The outcome of this is a story in which your viewers won't get surprised by the contents of a narrative. A world that someone can sink into and feel as if it's real because you've given reason as to why it could be real. The best way to describe it is that it just makes sense. It makes sense a character would act like that. It makes sense the magic system is like that, or the world is like that, because everything in the story has pointed towards those things just making sense. When the things you write flow from one point to another, and you give reason as to how and why the story is moving in that direction, then no one is going to have to stop and question what's going on, because you have made it clear what's going on and why. But that's wishful thinking. Expecting each aspect of your story to have a detailed explanation as to how it became that way is unreasonable to expect from any writer. There are times in which the writer messes something up. By accidentally making a character act out of character, or something happens that goes against what you have been told as the viewer, you have made people stop and look into the thing they think is wrong. And people, no matter how professional, will notice that something is off about the story they are watching. Breaking immersion is the cardinal sin of creative writing because it means that you, as a writer, have done something wrong. Despite being the proverbial god of this world that they are writing, with the ability to create characters from the tap of their fingers, their creations are wrong. A writer's job is to make the characters and world that they create act in accordance to how they have been built up as by the writer. Okay, maybe not their job, but any writer worth their salt should be making sure that the story they write makes sense by making a cohesive story that relies on the fundamental truths of the world that you have built. When a character says something out of character or a magic system changes as the story progresses, you are going to have a swath of audience members notice that change and be hyper aware of the mistake that you have made, which breaks their immersion and lowers their overall enjoyment of the series. As a writer, you don't want that to happen. You want a cohesive story that just makes sense. And in order to do that, you use narrative realism. Hey, remember when that was the whole point of this video? Narrative realism is a form of realism, but it's very different to what people think of when they say the word realism because it has nothing to do with the life we live as is described in the dictionary definition, which makes sense. In every thought I have had about narrative cohesion and immersion, the term realism never once came up because I had the preconception that realism was strictly related to real life. Realism from the perspective of someone who lives on Earth is built up by the things that we see and interact with, which means that the real within the definition of realism pertains to our own perspective. This mic is real because I can see it, have felt it. My brain acknowledges that it is real, and so in this world, this mic is real. But as soon as you add narrative, it changes. The realism is now contained in a bottle that does not interact with the world around it. Our world. Isolated from the rest of the world, an earthly perspective is no longer needed. You only need to come to terms with the reality that is this narrative. The resulting enjoyment that comes from a narratively real series is something that can and has been documented in the past, except I don't know about it because I am not willing to pay for the study that's been done on the subject. But from the things I have read on the subject, I can take a gander at how narrative realism and the subsequent immersion that comes from it affects the enjoyment of a certain show. Anytime we watch a piece of entertainment, there is the expectation that something is going to come from it, that there is a reason we are watching this piece of content in particular. A lot of the time, it is to get an emotion from that content, like happiness, fear, or sadness, or to teach you something interesting by having its main character go through something relatable. The goal of every story should be to get that thing across to the viewer, and while it's pretty much a shot in the dark whether or not people will get that thing, there are certain techniques a writer can use to help their cause. Good writing is a start. If the goal is to make people happy, then you have to be able to write good comedy. If you want to teach the reader a lesson, you have to make sure that the lesson is worthwhile. So, writing a good story should help. By doing that, you make sure that the viewer is actually focused on the content, and they have to feel connected to it if you want to make them cry for it. And I think you might know where this is going, because immersion is exactly that. Immersion is something that all writers seek in their writing because it means that the viewer has essentially become one with the content they are watching, and they will feel everything that you throw at them with even more depth. When you are immersed, the emotional highs are going to be even higher, and each lesson is going to be drilled into your brain even harder. It's interesting to talk about narrative realism in particular because for the most part the word realism will never show up. Not only is it something that you won't notice if done properly, but it's also not what most people think of when they say realism. It's always immersion, or plot progression, or character development, and I am here to say that all of those things are a product of narrative realism, whether you know it or not. Now, I will admit that nothing about narrative realism is exclusive to animation. This whole section can be applied to almost every medium of storytelling there is. Plays, movies, novels, Meat and Fuck Kingdom, and I urge you to think about narrative realism when it comes to all of them. That being said, there is something in the back of my mind that needs to connect this to anime in particular. This is an anime channel, after all, and I want to make sure that you know how this works within the anime sphere. So then, anime, right? Anime is cool. You're going to be getting a lot of different answers as to why that might be the case, but I think the one that we can all agree on is that anime is cool because it's animation. What? In fact, most of the reasons people like anime can be traced back to that fact. The idea that animation is animated or how it's not real, all opinions kind of coalesce into that general idea. The creativity behind the art form can only be done through animation. Some of the stories that this medium tells only work when they are made in animation, and I think it's important to understand why that is and why that's important right now. Anytime you want to create a narrative, you have to make sure that the medium you use is able to fully convey that narrative. When I see Nier Automata, I think that this story could only work within a video game, because the nature of the narrative is one that video games really play into, and there are experiences I could only ever find in a video game. Compare that to a webtoon like Purple Hyacinth, a story which uses the medium of webtoons to the best of its ability. It uses its portrait aspect to create amazing panels, it uses its digital nature to add music, and it uses the text, like the actual text, to further the narrative. Both of those are examples of a narrative cooperating with the medium that it's assigned to in order to create a better experience. In order to create the best possible narrative within a certain medium, you have to understand the pros and cons of said medium in order to know the medium's advantage and disadvantages. For example, video games are really hard to make, but they're really hard to make because you're giving the player some agency in the narrative and have to account for each of their actions. Novels are just a bunch of words, but that also means you can play with the reader's interpretation of those words in really interesting ways. In anime, there are some initial hurdles to get over, like being difficult to get into or needing a large amount of talented artists, but once you're given the go, you kind of get free reign. Each aspect of anime can be changed and molded in order to fit the narrative. You don't have to rely on reading or accounting for player agency. Each aspect is handcrafted. The visuals are whatever you want, the voice actors change their voices to better fit the character, the music is made to fit the niches of the show. How this affects narrative realism is that it gives the viewer a better chance to immerse themselves in fictional worlds when they are not dragged down by real life and their own perspective. It all comes back to how immersion can be broken. While there are things within a narrative that break immersion, like fan service or a character acting out of character, there are extraneous elements that can break immersion too. Breaking immersion within a narrative means that some aspect of the narrative was incorrect. It often drags into aspects of real life or breaks the fourth wall in some way. External immersion breaks often come when something within the structure of the medium is wrong, like a camera is off center or there is a mic in the background of a shot. These aren't things within the narrative. They are accidents that break your immersion of a show because something failed within the medium. Now, taking anime into consideration, I think it's pretty safe to say that there won't be a camera in the background of a shot, or will you be seeing Chris Pratt's face every second of the movie to remind you he's voicing Garfield. I'm not saying accidents like that don't happen in animation. Faulty animation and specific voice actors can do the same, but because the medium is crafted from the ground up, these incidents are much less severe. But that's circumstantial stuff. Because there are examples of anime messing up and live action not messing up, it feels disingenuous to say that anime breaks your immersion less. Which is why I want to add that at a fundamental level, animation is better at telling narratives. Kinda. Live action content is something that will always have ties to the real world. No matter how much you cake up an actor or put little huts in the mountains, the fact that this movie was shot using real people in real places will always be present. This isn't a scene of Aragorn kicking a helmet. It is a scene of Viggo Mortensen breaking his foot. And while you can change those things to better fit the narrative, you will always have to work within the limitations of reality in order to create live action content. VFX can only get you so far, which is why a lot of action films often gravitate towards realistic settings and characters. It's because it's a narrative that works extremely well within the live action formula. Whereas animation is a medium that doesn't have those same kinds of limitations. You still have to work within the confines of animation, but nothing is going to be lost when you add fantastical things to your already unreal settings or characters. And this can be backed up by looking at what is popular within the medium. 7 out of the top 10 movies on IMDb are non-fantasy. On the other hand, 9 out of the top 10 shows on my anime list are fantasy. Aye. Or have fantastical elements. What are you doing? Is that just a difference in culture between the stories produced in Japan and Hollywood? Maybe, but it could be that live-action media fits realistic narratives more than fantasy, and that anime is able to make fantasy narratives better than realistic ones. The ability to create something within each medium has been narrowed down to what that medium can do best. And while VFX has been getting better over the past few years, and even then, 3 of the top 10 shows on IMDb are fantasy, live action will always be better at telling realistic stories. That changes when you are given the ability to alter every little thing about a frame in a TV show or film. You can just make shit up and have it look the exact same as everything else. Yes, this is the same angle from the beginning of the video. Please do not go back and check. I think positing that as a choice may not have been right of me, because choosing makes it seem more like an active action rather than what it is, which is passive. Choosing to believe something is making an active choice. I choose to believe in aliens. I choose to believe in an afterlife. Those are decisions that we are continuously making day by day. Animation is not like that. It does not demand your belief in order to exist. It instead manipulates you in a nice way to believe in it, which makes the experience of the medium a lot better. Like a conversation with tacit trust, you trust what your parents tell you when you're a kid because they are the ones you look up to. You trust your partner because you want to see the best in them. You trust anime because it just makes them more fun. When we suspend our disbelief so much so that the existence of dragons is the status quo, and that elves can walk the land, then we can get closer to these people. Act as if they are real and have real emotions. We can connect to them on so many more levels because at every level we feel as if this person is real and exists, and is sad or happy or mad, emotions that we feel as well. Of course, they're not real, and to a certain point they aren't even trying to be, but maybe by being so unreal, to the point where nothing even reminds us of the existence of reality, we fold in on ourselves. If this person is not real, if this land is not real, if nothing I see is real, then what's stopping you from believing in the existence of it all? My name is Laszlo. Thank you for watching. See ya. This video has been in production for like a fucking year and it's finally done. Oh yeah. Where's my fucking mouse? Jesus Christ. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, send me money on Ko-Fi. kofi.com/whoislaszlo to pay for my PC. Thank you.